An extra body? What do you mean, an extra body? Mrs. Hetty Briggs spoke a little more loudly than she had intended, and her voice echoed in the stillness of the ruined chapel. Her steward lowered his head. He couldn't think of what else to add. They were silent a moment, and the hot wind that had so troubled them this summer shook the trees together. In spite of the warmth, Mrs. Briggs shivered. She touched her steward's sleeve and said more quietly, "My apologies, Gripen. You had better show me, I think." Turning away from them, she remembered the lady and gentleman who had accompanied her here to this little island, part of her husband's estate amongst the lakes and hills of Cumberland. They had stood a little apart from her while she spoke to her man, but were now frankly staring at her. The gentleman was the local magistrate, Mr. Sturgis, and Mrs. Briggs was suddenly very glad indeed that he had decided to come with them. The lady, very beautifully dressed for a trip across the lake and a visit to a ruin, was her house guest for the summer. The Vizegrafin, Margaret von Bolsenheim. Her lips were slightly parted, and there was a shimmer in her eye. "That is," Mrs. Briggs added, "perhaps you should show us all." Mrs. Briggs had always considered her ownership of St. Herbert's Island as accidental. It was just another feature of the estate her husband had purchased, like the walled garden behind the main house of Silverside, or the lawns that dropped down in front of it to the lake, and like them she regarded it as purely ornamental. The island was a pleasant spot for a picnic, and known for its magnificent views of the surrounding hills. In addition, the ruin of the old chapel added something romantic and picturesque for visitors to the area to discover. It was known that Mrs. Briggs had no objection to local people or travellers from elsewhere drawing their boats up onto the shingle. Therefore many took advantage of her generosity and arrived, sketchbooks in hand, to sample the scenery. Her one nagging concern about the island had always been that the chapel, disused for 100 years before Mr. Briggs acquired the land, still contained the altar tomb of Sir Luke de Beaufoy, 1st Earl of Greta, and his wife. There they had lain since the middle of the 15th century, while the walls decayed around them. On the one hand, Mrs. Briggs didn't think it right that they should be disturbed after resting over 300 years in one place. On the other, she knew the walls of the chapel must give way at some point, and when they did, the tomb would be smashed and their bones ground back into the clay. That didn't seem fitting either. She had given the thought voice one evening, a few days previously, while playing quadrille at Silverside with the Vizegrafin's son, and Mr. Sturgis. The Vizegrafin declared she had always thought the place absolutely perfect for a summer house. "So medieval that the local people persist in calling it the Island of Bones," she had said, laying down her cards. "Let the first Lord Greta and his wife be moved to Crosthwaite Church. Far more suitable. Then they can call it something nicer. Briggs Island, perhaps," she added, and sniggered a little into her cards. Mr. Sturgis had supported the princess wholeheartedly. The Vizegrafin's son, Felix, had contributed nothing to the conversation but a yawn. Mrs. Briggs had presumed the subject would be forgotten as the cards were laid down, but the following morning Mr. Sturgis had called at Silverside to tell them that the vicar of Crosthwaite would be happy to receive the tomb and the bones it contained, and to give Sir Luke and his wife a home on consecrated ground. The Vizegrafin began to draw plans for a summer house. Mrs. Briggs was still not convinced about the necessity of rebuilding, but at least the nagging guilt about the First Lord Greta's mortal remains would be removed, and she was hopeful that the Vizegrafin and her son would leave Silverside before she had to commit to constructing any of the Gothic wonders that now decorated that noble lady's sketchpad.